Nephilim Part 2. It's a 50-slide night tonight. We'll do a lot of reading. The first thing I want to say about the Nephilim, and we're going to pick up where we left off in version 1, the curse of the Nephilim, is this stuff isn't frivolous in any way, shape, or form, and the reason I'm putting it on a recording is so that in the future we can reference it and so forth. But it's to give you keys and clues on how to read your Bible, and you need to read it in a spiritual light. The first time we meet these dudes in Genesis 6 sets the tone for a lot of the things that occur in the Bible. I think maybe especially how nasty the adversary is, and how he is relentless in his pursuit of Messiah, and how relentless he is in pursuit of those who stand with Messiah. So I want to read you a couple of quotes here. One regarding the Nephilim by some of you may have heard of Francis Schaeffer. More and more we're finding that mythology in general, though greatly contorted, very often has some historical base. And the interesting thing is that one myth that one finds over and over again in many parts of the world is that somewhere a long time ago supernatural beings had sexual intercourse with natural women and produced a special breed of people. And I'm sure you're not surprised by that statement, but that's something we're going to get into a little bit tonight. Some of the other mythologies that have kind of bastardized what the Hebrew prophets wrote. And here's another one regarding the rebellious ones. The fathers of those special breed of people we know of as the Nephilim. Clark commentary here. The ancient Greeks appeared to have received by tradition an account of the punishment of the quote-unquote fallen angels, bad men after death, and their poets did, in conformity, I presume, with that account, make Tartarus the place where the giants who rebelled against Jupiter and the souls of the wicked were confined. Here, saith Hesiod in the Theogony, line 720, the rebellious titans were bound in penal chains. This will come up in a few minutes. And why, Bob, are we talking about this? Because the slide that I've shown many times in the past, that which some of you are familiar with, shows the Christian prophets, especially the one in the middle, Jude, the angels that kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness. And then the one after that, 2 Peter 2, 4, and 5, for God, if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, that's the word Tartaros there, cast them to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. And then the first one, also has the days of Noah, spirits in prison. They're in chains of darkness. And what did we just see that up here, the Titans were bound in penal chains. Now, so how did the Titans, which are from the Greek mythology, how did that come into the mindset of the Greek cosmological thinkers? Well, here you go. Remember old Mount Olympus? Or could this be a vestige of the mountain of God, Mount Zion, and the city of God on top of that, which you'll read over and over and over again in the Christian scriptures and in the Hebrew scriptures? Okay, fine, Bob. So what? So here's what the Greeks thought. Okay? Olympus, here at the top, home of the gods. There was the vault of heaven. There was Hades. You guys remember Hades down here. And Tartarus, Kronos is here. Just remember that. Kronos is one of the dudes that is in Greek mythology. So great, Bob. How do we care? Well, everybody who's been on my WebExes has seen my little map of the ancient Near East cosmological geography, big mouthful there. And every one of these verses here that I submit to you, one of which I actually quoted here at the top, this represents how the Hebrews looked at things. And the Greeks had a very similar look at it. And I'll go back to that. Well, let's just look at this. Here's where God dwelt up here in the heaven of heavens. Here, Psalm 104, just for instance. Who, God, lays the beams of his chamber in the waters. Those are the waters above the firmament talked about in Genesis, which I taught last month. Who, God, makes the clouds his chariot. He sits on them, okay? Who walks upon the wings of the wind. And the temple of God is above the firmament. It's the third heaven, above the heaven which is the firmament. Anyway, this whole picture that you see here is replicated over and over and over again in cultures beyond the Hebrews. So let's go look at this. Let me go do one more thing here. Here's the Vikings in Asgard. Asgard has the tree of life up here coming out of the mountain, and we have the sacred tree, and it either supports this high mountain. In this area that I pointed to here in the middle section, I point to one of the worlds of the Asgardian cosmology, which mirrors Hades of the Greeks. And oh yeah, there's a fiery place in the Asgardian cosmology too, which, geez, that would be kind of like Gehenna. Okay, so I want you to see that which we've seen, some of you guys have read Bullfinch's mythology, some of you have been brought up in the traditions where you know all this stuff, and of course lately movies with Thor and a few other Asgardians come to Earth, and it's in the consciousness of people. But it stems from a disjunctive representation of the early Hebrews' absolute truth. Okay? Here's one for you, those who remember the Titans. We just read about the Titans. They were supposedly in chains in Tartarus. They were living on Mount Othrys, not Mount Olympus, mind you. The Titans most famously included the 12 children of the primordial Gaia, Mother Earth, and Uranus, Father Sky. They were giant deities, not necessarily men, in Greek tradition, of incredible strength, who ruled during the legendary times. Usually it's called the Golden Age. Many strains of that story, and there's multiple strains of that story, not just one like we have in the Bible, but the many strains of that story of the gods and the fights and the this and the that. Jupiter, in this case, I guess it would be Zeus, but in Greek. Sources that include Plato and Apollodorus of the Greek letters put certain of the Titans, Kronos, which I showed you earlier, and Apollos for a while, in Tartarus, the pit of hell. The pit of hell, which comes up many places. The pit. You guys who know your scriptures, these words are not unfamiliar to you. The pit. Sides of the pit. Where in the book of Revelation we know that the pit is where the adversary is thrown for a while, and then there's a cover put on it. Anyway, these Titans are bound in chains. But we know that the 2 Peter 2:4, the Jude 1:6, the slide I showed you earlier, that's the real story. And I know some of you you've already determined you understand all this, but I think it's very important as we start on this second, maybe final section on the Nephilim, at least for now, that we understand that these traditions run through all cultures. If you go to the Chinese, they have a dragon. You know all this. So, meanwhile, back at the ranch, let's go back to the biblical side of things, still on the trail of Goliath of Gath, which is, of course, he's the most famous Nephilim that we know of. And then we're going to do some others tonight. We're going to look at Nimrod. We're going to look at the Amorites, the sons of Anak, which is where we stopped last time. We stopped looking at the Nephilim, at the sons of Anak, as the children of Israel came out of Egypt, and we're going into the Promised Land. We'll go back and look at them. We'll look at the Amalekites. We'll look at Og. We did look at Og, king of Bashan, just a little bit, but we're going to look at him in general, in specifics, and then we'll get to Goliath. So that's the plan. Nimrod, after the flood, grandson of Ham. one of the sons of Noah, not really a really good son. Ham had sex with Noah's wife. I can prove that biblically. We don't have time tonight, but that's what he did when it says he uncovered his father's nakedness. That's a biblical usage. If you look that term up, that's what it means. Had sex with his wife. He's before Abraham. He's called a mighty one, a gibor. That's a Hebrew word. A mighty hunter, a gibor hunter. And we'll look at giborim. We'll look at that word. The I am is the plural for the Hebrew. We'll look at Orion the hunter, because many people think that Nimrod is Orion, maybe Hercules, maybe Thor, and that his kingdom was Babylon. In the Amorites, when we look at the Amorites, we're going to look at Genesis 15:16, where it says the iniquity of the Amorites has not been filled up. Something God says to Abraham, if I'm recollecting. We'll look at the sons of Anak. It's Numbers 13, 21 through 33, where the only other use of Nephilim in our Bible, and it makes the sons of Anak, or the Anakim, which is the plural, the Anakims, giants in verse 33. We'll look at that. We'll read Deuteronomy 1 and 2 and Deuteronomy 9 to flesh out the sons of Anak, because they're very important. The last slide of this session, the 50th slide we're on, 9. The 50th slide, I challenge you to remember that when the children of Israel left Egypt and they went to the Promised Land, and we'll get into all the maps and I'll show you some of this stuff, these giants, were waiting for them. We know the spies went in and to the land and so forth. But you really need to see how vast the program was that was set up to dissuade, that's a kind word, dissuade the Israelites to come back home. So let's get into this here. First guy, Nimrod. I've given a lot of these slides you're going to want for your, for your own study, because I stick in a lot of things here for your own personal study. The section here in Genesis 10, 1 through 12, is the 5th Toledot of the Genesis record. There are, I believe, 11, maybe it's 10 Toledots. That's separations where it uses the word generations. I'll highlight it here. That's the word Toledoth in Hebrew. And it's where Moses, who wasn't an eyewitness to a lot of this stuff, Moses took these records and put them together accurately in 10 sections. And that's how the book of Genesis is divided up. It's a fabulous, I'll do some night on that to show you how wonderfully that was put together. But here's the 5th one. We're talking about Nimrod. Now, these are the records of the generations of Shem, Ham, Japheth, sons of Noah. The sons were born to them after the flood. This is important because Nimrod was after the flood. Sons of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Teras. Sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Ripath, and Togarmah. Sons of Yavan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. And these were all the coastlands of the nations, were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, their families, blah, blah, blah. Son of Ham, the sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, which is that's the Hebrew word for Egypt, Put, Canaan. The sons of Cush were Sheba, Havilah, Sabta, Ramah, and Sabteka. And the sons of Ramah were Sheba and Dadan. Now Cush became the father of Nimrod. So we're boom, 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 down to Nimrod. And he became a Gibor. A giant is how the Septuagint translates that. It's the word gigas in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures. And folks, had a good discussion with somebody about this last week. Again, the Septuagint doesn't represent a skewed version of the Hebrew Scriptures. It's another. It's based on another text other than the Masoretic text. So don't just brush it off. If the Septuagint calls Nimor a gigas, a giant, then you can take that to the bank. He became a giant on the earth, and he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore, it is said, quote unquote, here's a proverb written already in this ancient time like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. That was a proverb they had. The beginning of Nimrod's kingdom was Babel, which is Babylon to most of you, Erech Akkad Calneh in the land of Shinar, which I'll show you. And that from that land he went forth to Assyria, built Nineveh, remember that's Jonah's Nineveh, and Rehoboth-ir and Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah, that great city. Now, let's look at something here. The root meaning of Nimrod, as most scholars today think, is from the word to rebel, or a rebel. And this thing, mighty hunter before the Lord, think about it. He's not showing off his prowess before God. What's the big use of that? What would be the use of that? There is none. So he's not showing off before God. He's a mighty hunter who's rubbing God's nose in it. He's before the Lord. And literally, that's what the Hebrew says. He's a mighty hunter in the face of God. And it's very important that you know that. As we continue on with Nimrod, let's see a little bit more. Constellation of Orion is mentioned in Job 9:9, 38, 31 to 5:8. The Hebrew word for the constellation is Kesil, and it means foolish, arrogant, impious, rebellious. Ancient Judaism in hundreds of places associate Orion with Nimrod. Orion the hunter. Yes, many of you know this. Bullinger's portrayal, be very careful of this in Witness of the Stars. I'm absolutely convinced he's wrong on this. He has Orion the hunter as the coming one, the Messiah. But literally, Orion is a hunter, and I believe that Nimrod / Orion is a hunter of men. Let's just take a look at Orion. There's the constellation of Orion. Now, let's be careful here. I don't go to many constellations to teach the Bible. I don't need to. There's enough in the Word to teach the Word. But when it comes to, things that were written in the stars before the time of the written scriptures, these are fabulous. In the constellation of Orion, many of the portrayals of this constellation show this is what I'm pointing to here, that is obviously a bow as a shield. And the quiver in the back there is shown sometimes and sometimes not. But in this constellation, if you were to look into your star charts, this is surrounded by a bunch of animals. It's obvious that Orion is a hunter in the ancient perception. Okay, now I mentioned earlier that maybe Nimrod, who's the subject of this conversation at the moment, is possibly Hercules. I think you read that. If you didn't, I want to show you that. Is he the hunter too? They think sometimes he is, but I don't. And I had to look at the constellation Hercules, and I think it's very important that you understand. First of all, Hercules is the Greek word for the constellation. It had a Hebrew word way back, but just to focus here, it's Hercules in the star charts, so you wouldn't be confused. And I think that, again, Hercules is a very interesting constellation. Here we go. Here's Hercules at the top, a couple of different pictures of a star chart. Yeah, he has his foot in a very interesting place on the head of Draco the dragon. This is the Messiah. Or it's Michael the Archangel. One of the two. Many of the star chartists depict, I think you'll find this even in Bullinger, that he's holding the head of a multi-headed dragon. Revelation 12:3, and there's another one in the Hebrew scriptures that talk about the dragons in the celestial sea. Notice the foot. Who's crushing whose head? I'd say it's Messiah. Just a little stuff to wet your whistle. I thought you might like it. So I really think that Orion the hunter is definitely Nimrod. He's in the face of Yahweh, and Hercules, or in this particular case, I think it's Messiah, Mashiach, or Michael the Archangel, is depicted here as this constellation with its head on the dragon. So, now, let's go back to Gibborim, because I want to talk to you a little bit about this. The mighty ones, used in the Septuagint often as a reference to giants. And sometimes, I haven't got time to go through it tonight, sometimes it is an interpolation of the Hebrew text, but most of the time it's not. It's very obvious why the translator into Greek chose the word gigantes, like he did here in Genesis 6:4. Now the giants, the Nephilim, were upon the earth in those days. Septuagint has gigantes. And not Sabado gigantes, but Septuagint gigantes. And after that, when the sons of God were wont to go into the daughters of men, they bore children to them. These were the Gibborim, is the Masoretic text. Septuagint is gigantes. These were the giants of old, men of renown. Okay. Now, remember that Gibborim is not always giants, because David's personal army, if you remember, was also called the Gibborim, the mighty men, or the mighty ones. So it's not always about the giants, but a good portion of time in the Hebrew and especially the Septuagint, it is by translation into from Gibbor, as I'll highlight here, into gigantes. Okay? So, big deal, Bob. So what? Let's take Nimrod. We know Nimrod was a giant. Nimrod, the mighty king of Babylon, born probably 200 years before Abraham. Therefore, he was a contemporary probably of Terah, Abraham's father. We're going to go back in the Word and see this. And Nimrod's kingdom, we'll see the map, is right smack into the path of Abraham's call from Ur of the Chaldees. Terah took Abraham his son and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son's Abraham's wife, and they went out together from Ur of the Chaldees in order to enter the land of Canaan, and they went as far as Haran and settled there. Now, there's a few things that I want to show you. Let's look at the map here first. Typically, I'm going to move the arrow on screen so you know I'm talking about this arrow here, from Ur of the Chaldees down here near the Persian Gulf mouth, up to Haran is the traditional Ur. But there are some non-traditional things that I want to show you just for your own readership and enjoyment. When the statement here, Ur of the Chaldees, here in Genesis 11:31 is put, it's an anachronism here. Chaldees is actually not used in any literature before like the 8th or 9th century BC. So a lot of people think this is a scribal gloss or an error, and that Ur here might be, they were looking back trying to find Ur of history, and this one, Ur of the Chaldees, they came up with the map Ur down here. Well, recent research proposes another Ur, and it matches Urfa up here in Turkey, which is just north of Haran. How about that? It actually puts a little more bite to the story that we just read, where, sorry, I think I went to the wrong verse, Genesis 11:31, where they went together from Ur to go to Canaan, and they only got as far as Haran. It makes a little sense that they went, maybe 50 miles to Haran, and they didn't come down here to where they were supposed to go, down here to Canaan. But they hung out a while. Now, you may have heard teachings about, Leadfoot Abe, and his father, and they hung around Haran. And this makes a lot more sense if Urfa, Turkey, might be the Ur of history. That's just something for, you can find this, by the way, in the Ebla tablets and the Ugarit, those from Ugarit. Ebla is, they show it here. I'm circling it on screen, and Ugarit, they both refer to Urfa or Ura. And I'm thinking that makes a lot more sense, that they traveled down to Haran, which was in the kingdom of Babel, because, if you remember how we just read, Nimrod took over Akkad. Let me move this little circle here. There's Akkad, and then he went up to Nineveh. We'll circle, whoops, sorry, this is Babylon. This is Nineveh, way up here. So the sphere of influence of Nimrod was all over the place. And Abraham had to wade through the mess that had been set up before him. But eventually he gets to Canaan, right? Abraham in and around Canaan. And we know, and I'm just taking you through some of these things to get to the main focus of the Nephilim tonight. But I don't want you to think that Abraham was not involved, shall we say. This screen shows Genesis 14, the War of the Nine Kings. sounds like what was that recent, the Hobbit movie, the War of the Five Armies. Well, actually there were 5 armies on one side and 4 armies on another for this particular battle in Genesis 14, where 5 kings out of Canaan fought against 4 other kings, and the 5 prevailed. The northern kings prevailed, went down south to Sodom and took Abraham's nephew Lot and took him away to this little area up here in Dan, at the north of this map. And of course then Abraham gets his, 318 trained servants, and goes and gets him and clocks those kings, and he comes back, and the southern kings who had been just dispossessed come out and greet him and thank him. And then you know about Melchizedek, king of Salem, which is Jerusalem, or the Jebusite kingdom, came out and greeted him, and Abraham recognized him as a particularly important spiritual person and gave him 1/10 of all the spoils. The important thing, I want to bring up this because it'll come up again later in the teaching tonight. Abraham was the king, I think it's Bera, king of Bera, comes out and says, "Oh, take all the spoils, Abraham. You were great. We love you. Thanks." And Abraham says, No. I'm just going to take enough food for my fighting men and we'll go home. I don't want anybody telling some historical time later that, Abraham's God didn't take care of him, or Abraham wasn't able to do it on his own, and this kind of thing. It's a very important thing, the strain of thought through the Abraham, his sons, and his sons' sons, which it comes up later when the children of Israel come out of the land of Egypt. It's very important, and I don't believe it's by chance that it's in the Word that, no, we'll just, we're on a mission from God, and this is what we're doing. And he doesn't just kowtow to the local traditions and the world's way of doing things. He goes, I'm just going to, we'll take the food that we need and we're going home. We got Lot, we're good. You'll see why I say this a little bit later. So, now let's go through about, 500 years of history. Joseph goes to Egypt. His brothers follow, and then Jacob. Let's go back one. We remember the greatness of Abraham, his son Isaac, and his son, Jacob, and, of course, Esau. But Esau doesn't come into this. And out of Jacob come the children of Jacob, meaning the children of Israel. So the next screen I wanted to show you was that one of the sons of Jacob, Joseph, was sold into slavery by his 11 brothers. Great company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels, bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, carried it down to Egypt. There passed by the Midian merchantmen, and they drew up, lifted up Joseph out of the pit where his brothers had put him, sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. They brought Joseph to Egypt. You know that story. You know that Joseph was imprisoned, and that he got out, and then he ran the kingdom of the Pharaoh, and, the 7 years of famine, the 7 years of plenty, and all that. And then Jacob, who was back here, back here in Canaan, while Joseph was down in Egypt, Joseph brings his brothers, and the brothers go back and bring their dad, and they all lived happily ever after in Egypt for 400 freaking years. And during those 400 years, a lot of crazy things went on back at the ranch, as I said earlier. I gave a hint of what was going on when I gave you this map of Abraham in Canaan, and I point to a bunch of these ites that started to come into the land, or at least were allowed to grow in the land, because they were there when Abraham went from Ur down here. They were there. They just became powerful on purpose. Powerful on purpose. Because, next map, Bob, when the children of Israel, this is not that complicated, I promise you, when the children of Israel were in the land of Goshen, up here, folks, okay? They were in the land of Goshen, and they left. Here's the green arrows. They come down here. Before I do that, I'm going to show you, bear with me, I'm going to show you the traditional route. Here's the traditional route of Israel coming from Egypt after 400 years in captivity. Okay? Same place, land of Goshen. Come down Sinai. Here's the traditional, this is the traditional crossing of the Red Sea area. Whoops, sorry. Move the screen. Don't move the screen, Bob. This is the traditional area of the crossing of the Red Sea. Right there. Small as you can get, right? But I was showing you something different. Some of the best and latest research shows that they came down the left side of the Sinai Peninsula, down here to the, I think it's, what is this, the Gulf of Aqaba? Let me see if I can zoom in here for you guys a little bit. Yeah, the Gulf of Aqaba. They say that it may have been right here where the crossing was. And because of the new location of Mount Sinai, Horeb, on the right side of the Gulf of Aqaba, making the trip north to Canaan a little more reasonable. Give this to you when you print out the screen. You can go to Steve Rudd's Exodus map route if you want to. Just Google him. He does a good job, a very good job of positing a different crossing of the Red Sea at a different point and going to Mount Sinai on the right side here. Because, folks, Midian, here, let me zoom in again here, show you. Midian is really over here. See down here on the right? The Midianites were really down here on the right. So getting them there, and Moses meeting Jethro, his father, and the whole bit makes a lot more sense with this non-traditional map. Big deal, Bob. So what? So the big red arrow is what I wanted to show you. The big red arrow shows the military reconnoitering of Moses and his 12 quote-unquote spies, inclusive of Joshua and Caleb, going into the land from the south. And militarily, some of you guys that know this, they eventually came to the right side and crossed the river Jordan up here at the top. But this first reconnoitering into the land of Canaan, very important, because as many of you know, I'm sorry, I'm showing you my musical sides, but there, Israel coming to the land, moving to Montana so soon. They were going to be a dental floss tycoon. They found, not dental floss, but big grapes, big clusters of grapes up here in Eshcol, right at the bottom right of the Red Sea. And from Numbers 13, we see that not only did they find very large people living in the land, which we'll get to, they found very large clusters of grape that had to be born between two men. I found a great, very, very old, 2,000-year-old photograph of it here on the right. Just thought you should know that, we'll go back one slide, show you that this foray, I'll drag this a little bit higher. The foray was here into the valley of Eshcol, as we'll see it here. Eshcol which is where they found this great and abiding fruit. Now, big deal, Bob. So, who was in the promised land when the Israelites got there? I gave you a bunch of maps here because it's important that you see it's not perfectly understood, but for the most part, all the names are here. All the ites, all the ims, all the Philistines, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and we'll see here, remember old Og, the king of Bashan, he was up here. This is the sea, Dead Sea at the bottom here. The other sea. I can't even think of it for a minute. And Og lived up here. Sihon right below him. I'm going to move this so you can see it. Sihon down here was another king that the children of Israel actually had to go through this area, as I showed in the old map. They came to the right side of the Dead Sea and came across the Jordan about there. So when we look at the other maps, they came across between the Sea of Gennesaret and the Dead Sea here, right near Gilgal. Okay? Now these maps will mean something to you in a little bit. I don't want to put things, I don't want people to not understand what kind of fight the children of Israel were up against here. So let's go to this is the 40 years they wandered here. That's generally where most people think. And there's the crossing of the River Jordan at Gilgal from a traditional map. I don't care if you think they came up to the right side or to the left side right now. They got here, okay? And eventually, I'm trying to give you some perspective here. After the Exodus, the 12 tribes of Israel set up camp, and it looked kind of like this. This is the 12 tribes of Israel. And I circle one area, Bashan, because that's where our friend Og shows up, okay? And then I'm going to show you one more map, and then we're going to get into some word here. The area of the 12 tribes, okay, back one here. This is in the book of Joshua, after a bunch of the battles were done. Then this, during the book of Judges, kind of shows you the same, and then it shows you Dan up here at the top near Mount Hermon, and Mount Hermon is pretty important in the scheme of spiritual matters. It's the center of Baal worship in the ancient Near East. It matters because Og was the king of Bashan right in that area. So, this is what I ended my last Nephilim teaching with. God did and does not command wanton destruction of people. But He did command Abraham to go to the land which was his. And these giants that stood in the way of the children of Israel coming to the land, they obstructed the purposes of God. And therefore, we're going to see the story of why God did what He did. The holy war with the giant clans after the flood is in many, many, many records. One that's late in the writing of the Hebrew Scriptures shows us that the Amorites, according to Amos, were huge. Okay? This is 767 to 753 BC. Okay? The date of the Exodus was 700 years previous to that. But we don't know from any of the records in the first 5 books that the Amorites were huge. But we do see it in Amos. Very cool. I think that is very cool. That happens the same thing. Think with me. We know that the sons of God, cohabited with the daughters of men in Genesis 6. But it's not till Jude and 2 Peter, thousands of years past that we find out that the angels that sinned were thrown into Tartarus because they disobeyed. That's not in the Hebrew Scriptures. So you don't always it's not always written in one book. It's all over the place, this stuff. So we find out the Amorites, the height of cedars. They were not small people. And let me just say something about Amorites. Scholars, me included, generally think the Amorites are a kind of a catch-all, that they include all the clans that waited for the children of Israel in the land. Let's look at this. The Amorites. Genesis 15, 13 through 21. God said to Abraham, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs," Egypt, "where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterwards they will come out with many possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age. Then in the 4th generation you will return." He was in Canaan. "They will return here. For the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet full. It came about when the sun had set, it was very dark, and behold, there appeared a smoking oven." Yeah, you got to have those smoking ovens. Somebody do the Hebrew on that. I just didn't. "And a flaming torch, and passed between these pieces." This is a covenant. Pieces of an animal. "And on the day the Lord made a covenant," there it is, "covenant with Abraham, saying, to your descendants I have given this land. From the river of Egypt, the Nile, as far as the great river Euphrates." This is a huge piece of land, folks. "The Kenite, the Kenizzite, and the Kadamite, and the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Rephaim, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Girgashite, and the Jebusite." List of clans comes up over and over and over of the peoples and their helpers who obstruct the land. They did a big land grab. They obstruct the children of Israel coming back. And I gave you a few more scriptures if you wanted to go into a few more of these people. But they come up over and over, and it's not by chance, under the auspices of basically the Amorites, who we find from Amos were as large as cedar trees. And here's a thought that comes to mind. Were they all that big? Doubtful. Doubtful. We see later from the book Samuel that the Philistines who hired Goliath of Gath, they weren't all huge, but they found the huge guys, and they used them. So I'm not completely convinced, really, I'm just not convinced that everybody was huge. I think that the huge guys, look, the Nephilim were the progeny of really, really bad angels. And don't think that they were pleasant people to be around. And don't think that they were pleasant to each other. I just don't think they could stand each other. I don't think that they cohabited themselves and made a bunch of big people and they all stayed together and they were all in one place. They weren't. I think they disseminated all over the earth. And I'll plug the book that I think, what's the guy's name? Douglas Van Dorn, Giants, Sons of God, who goes through a lot of the cultural representation of just what I said. So his book will come up later. I'll let you see it. So Amorites. Is that all I want to say about the Amorites? Yeah, because I want to move on to one of another set of people that obstructed. Let's see. Let's go back to the map. We're going to go back to one of the maps here and find the Amalekites. Well, where did Bob? Where's the Amalekites? No. Here's my map of things. The Amalekites down here. No, that's not them either. I didn't get a good map of the Amalekites. They were the first tribe, specifically outside of the general term Amorites, who met the children of Israel, and the children of Israel wanted to go through their land. Let's just read the section here. I picked out, look, there's hundreds of scriptures here that describe these peoples, these clans that the Israelites met. Hundreds! And you could read these, and don't read them fast. I just picked out a few because we have that much time. Exodus 17, 7 through 16, he named the place Massah, or Meribah, because of the quarrel of the sons of Israel, and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord really among us or not?" Then Amalek came and fought against Israel at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, "Go out, choose men for us and go out, fight Amalek." Tomorrow I will station myself at the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. Joshua did this and fought Amalek. Moses and Aaron and Hur went up to the top of the hill, so that it came that when Moses held his hand up, Israel prevailed. We know this story. And when he let his hand down, Amalek prevailed. Moses' hands were heavy. They put a stone under it. He sat on it. Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one side and another, one on the other. Thus his hands were steady till the sun set. So Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this in a book in the memorial, recite it to Joshua. I will utterly blot out the memory, not just the people, the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Moses built the altar, named this Jehovah Nissi. The Lord is my banner. And he said, the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war against Amalek from generation to generation. This is a prophecy. Yeah, Jehovah Nissi. You know, one of my favorite verses in the Bible is Revelation 19:16, where it says Jesus comes back and he's holding a banner. It means war. The banner here means war. The Lord is my banner. Each of the 12 tribes had a banner. A little more about that later. So here's Amalek early in the scene. Here's Amalek a little later. God repeats this to his people. Remember what Amalek did to you along the way when you came out from Egypt. So he's down at the southern end of Canaan. How he met you along the way, listen to this, folks. Attacked you, among you, all the stragglers at your rear when you were faint and weary and did not fear God. Therefore it shall come about when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your surrounding enemies in the land which the Lord your God gives as a possession, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek, you must not forget. And just a little hint here, the Hebrew Amalek means vexation. It's equivalent to the Arabic imlak. You can see where it comes from, and it will not surprise you that the Arabic means giant. Okay, Amalek. The Amalekites even later, after, this is, I'm scrolling forward 700 years here, folks. Just bear with me because I want to get this in, and I don't want to lose the thread of Amalek. Later, how many years? Well, I say 400 years later. It may have been more than that. Then Samuel, so we're in the king's period, said to Saul, Saul is the first king, right? The Lord sent me to anoint you as king over his people, over Israel. Now, therefore, listen to the words of the Lord says, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel, how he set himself against him in the way while he, Israel, was coming up from Egypt. Now, go and strike Amalek, utterly destroy all he has, do not spare him, put to death both men, woman, child, infant, ox, sheep, camel, and donkey. Did you read that? Put to death. Is that what he did? Let's keep reading. Then Saul summoned the people, numbered them to Taim, 200,000 foot soldiers, 10,000 of Judah, went to the city of Amalek, set an ambush. Saul said to the Kenites, go depart, go down among the Amalekites, so that I do not destroy you with them, for you showed kindness to the sons of Israel when they came up for you. So the Kenites departed from among the Amalekites. So Saul defeated the Amalekites from Havilah to Shur, which is east of Egypt. He captured Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive. What did Saul say? Samuel say? Put to death. Is that what Saul did? I don't think so. And he utterly destroyed all the people at the edge of the sword, but Saul and the people spared Agag and the rest of the sheep. What did he say? Kill all the sheep. We know this story. Kill all the oxen, kill all the fatlings, kill all the lambs. But no, Saul didn't. Best of the sheep were kept. And so Samuel has a problem with what Saul did. You can read the story if you keep going in 1 Samuel 6:15-33. And Samuel said, as thy sword hath made women childless. Nice mind picture from Agag, not a nice person. So shall your mother be childless among women. Samuel hewed, I love that, hewed Agag in pieces before the Lord in Gilgal. And you know the rest of the story. Saul doesn't keep his kingship. And this is 1 Samuel 15. 1 Samuel 17 is Goliath. And you'll see some other things in there as to why Saul had the kingship taken away. So that's okay, we got Amorites, we got Amalekites. Let's go to the Anakim. We looked at them, okay, in our last session. And the most important thing here, this is when the 12 spies had come into the land. They returned and said, "Oh my God, we went to the land where you sent us," here in the middle. And certainly, it does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. They had the grapes, right? Nevertheless, the people who live there are strong. Cities are fortified, very large. Moreover, we saw oh my God, the descendants of Anak. Okay, Anak. Amalek is living in the land. There he is again. Of the Negev, that's the triangular part of the Sinai Peninsula, just below the Dead Sea, actually. And the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, they're living in the hill country, the Canaanites by the sea. And Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Hey, wait a minute. We should, by all means, go up and take possession of it, for we surely will overcome it." But the men who'd gone up with him said, "We are not able, they're too strong for us." So he gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report, and saying that the land through which we have gone and spying it out is a land devours its inhabitants. Some people think that means cannibalism, not just a figure of speech. And I don't doubt that. And all the people whom we saw in it were men of great size. There also we saw the Nephilim. The sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim. This is scripture. This is not my comment in here. This red is in the Hebrew text. And we became grasshoppers like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. This is the only other use of Nephilim in the Bible. That's why the Anakim are important. And I know I showed where the Anakim were here. Yeah. Yeah, sure, Bob. There it is, on the right here. I'll move the little circle. Basically, that's where they think the Anakim were. Okay? So we have a little bit more. The sons of Anak, who are part of the Nephilim. Okay? So, there also, Deuteronomy 2:11 talks about them as giants. The Anakim were counted as Rephaim, another word for giants. And our little research group at TLTF is working on some of the words here. The Rephaim is kind of an important thing. I say here we're going to look at Deuteronomy in a little bit, I think. Gone about an hour here. We'll see some of the details if we read Deuteronomy 1 and 2. But let me go down in a slide before I'll remind myself to come back here. So, here's another guy I want to pick up before we start reading all that stuff in Deuteronomy. Sihon the Amorite. Okay, we had the map of where Sihon was. That's not that map. It's a different map, which Bob cannot find at the moment. I don't think it matters quite that much. Maybe trying to find it here, folks. Maybe it's further up. But Sihon the Amorite was just south of, well, I'm sure we're going to get to it. Put it somewhere. Sihon the Amorite was just south of Bashan, just south of Og, the king of Bashan. And in some Jewish traditions, apocryphal and pseudepigraphal accounts, that doesn't mean they're not full of historical stuff. Sihon is either Canaan, son of the wife, Ham's wife, by an angel, another angel, or some other giant. And I gave you the reference here if you want to look it up. All the traditions of the Jews outside of Scripture point to Sihon being a giant, just like Og, king of Bashan. And the record for Sihon is in Numbers 21. The children of Israel asked this guy, look, we don't want to mess with you, just want to go through here. We're heading into the land of, we're going across the Jordan, we're going to go through here, just let us go. Dude didn't like it. Sihon did not like it. Israel sent messengers to Sihon, Numbers 21, king of the Amorites, saying, let me pass through your land. We'll not turn into your fields. We're not going to drink into your vineyards. We're not going to drink the waters of your well, but we will go along by the king's highway until we pass your borders. Kind of just like Abraham said to the king of Berah, look, no, I'm not going to take anything of yours. We'll just take some food. Let us go home. And the same thing here. The reaction of Berah in the record of Abraham isn't quite like Sihon the Amorite. They go out to war, and of course they kill Sihon the Amorite. And next in line is Og. And we find out for Og, this slide was used in the last session. If you want to go back, or if you want to just have this, of course I'll send it to you. The record here in Joshua. Now these are the kings of the land with the children of Israel smote and possessed their land on the other side of Jordan. That's the east side, towards the rising of the sun, rising in the east, from the river Arnon unto Mount Hermon, and all the plain of the east. Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt in Heshbon, ruled from Oror, which is upon the bank of the river Arnon. Sounds like the Lord of the Rings here, but in the middle of the river, and from half Gilead, even of the river Jabbok, which is the border of the children of Ammon, and from the plain of the Sea of Sharonoth, that's the Sea of Galilee, on the east, and to the Sea of the Plain, even to the Salt Sea on the east, the way of Beth Shash-Imoth, and from the south under, Ashdoth Pilgath, and the coast of Og, the king of Bashan, who was of the remnants of giants, Og, which dwelt in Taroth at Edrei, and he reigned in Mount Hermon. And of course I have the other scriptures here, and we went through this last time. Og was a big dude, and he was a big deal, not just a big dude. 22 times this guy's mentioned in scriptures. Here's only a couple of them. King of Bashan, Deuteronomy 3:11, remained of the giants. Behold, his bedstead was the bedstead of iron, 9 cubits, which we figured out was about 19 feet by 8.5 feet, just his bed. So the guy was a pretty big guy. Details. And here's the reference I wanted to give you, Giants, Sons of God, by Douglas Van Dorn. Pick it up. You can read it in Kindle. I have a PDF copy of it. I think it'd be more proper if you bought the guy's book. He writes, he's a Christian, writes very, very well, gives you a lot of documentation. Go online and buy it. So don't ask me for the PDF. I really feel that the guy who support his ministry has just done a fabulous job bringing you up to date on the Nephilim and why we even care about them. Okay, so I was going to say here, this little section here, a little tidbit, a very important tidbit. Og, king of Bashan, reigned in Mount Hermon. Big deal. So what? It is a big deal. Here's the so what. And I do a lot of this teaching in my No More See seminar, where I talk about Jesus. What does Jesus have to do with Mount Hermon? Here we go. Mount Hermon is very important as to why Og is such a dude that we need to be concerned about. He controlled what is considered, and this is from the book of Enoch, nothing wrong with the book of Enoch as a historical document, to be the place where the initial angels that kept not their first estate made their landing. Okay, some of you already know this. And Og reigned in Mount Hermon. Let's look at the cosmic geography of this mountain. Here it is on a map. Ooh, what happened on Mount Hermon? The Transfiguration. And I can prove this to you. I don't have time tonight, but I can show it to you. Jesus went there for a reason. Here's the map I was looking for. Good Lord. Here's Kingdom of Og. Oh, here to the right in Bashan, next to the Sea of Galilee or the Sea of Gennesaret. up here in the top right. Mount Hermon was just north of his constitutional area. And here's even a better picture of, here's Mount Hermon, very, very high mountain, probably the most high mountain in this area. I can't remember if it's the highest, it might be. But here's what Jesus did. He walked about 35 miles to make a point to somebody on top of that mountain. Could it be Satan? Let me just show you another little map here. I call this Jesus' in-your-face tour. It's near the end of his ministry, and if you follow the breadcrumbs here, start with Capernaum, okay? He goes up to Tyre, up here on the left, and he preaches there. And then he comes down to the area of Galilee, passes through Galilee, comes across to the Decapolis, the 10 cities. And there's very spiritual reasons why he does this. First of all, Tyre and Sidon, which is north of Tyre, are outside. This is the only time you'll ever read that Jesus went outside Israel proper. And he did it for a reason. This is where he walks on the water. There's a reason he walks on the water, just not to show off. It has to do with the sea and walking on the water. But he comes down, goes to the Decapolis, which is the Greek word for the 10 cities on this side of the Sea of Galilee, our very, very, very special place where Sihon, the king of the Amorites, and north of him, Og, the king of Bashan, lived. And boy, further north is Caesarea Philippi, Mount Hermon. If I move this little thing, this is Mount Hermon up here. There's a reason I had Caesarea Philippi circled. But Jesus went up here, and as I said, it was 35 miles from Bethsaida up to Mount Hermon. That's no easy jog when you don't have chariots or, camels. Maybe they took camels, but the fact is, Jesus went up there and was transfigured on that mountain. And it's important because that's where he knew this whole cosmic mess-up, Brits would call it a cock-up, occurred in Genesis 6, and he was transfigured before all to see. And basically, that's why I call it in my No More Sea seminar, it's in your face. Nimrod was in God's face, Jesus was in their face here. And the things that were said on the Mount of Transfiguration, which I absolutely am convinced is Mount Hermon, you'll see this on this map here where I've circled Panias. That's from the Greek word for Pan, the god Pan. This is the area of absolute pagan worship throughout the ages since those angels came down on Mount Hermon. That's why Og stayed around there. That's why all the Rephaim are in that area, according to these ancient maps that I'm showing you. So let's return a little bit and see some more about these people that met Joshua after he crossed the river Jordan. We'll go back to the other side of Jordan and read from Joshua that at the time came Joshua and cut off the Anakims from the mountains. I'm just pushing forward here, folks, from Debir and from Anab. And you can write all your questions you want to me about Jesus and the Mount of Transfiguration, because it's an absolute stunning reversal of fortunes that he, just a brief aside here. I taught you, I think it was last time, it says in Ephesians and a couple other places that Jesus went to the spirits in prison and preached to them. He was also doing it while he was still alive on the Mount of Transfiguration. And don't you think that these spirits didn't know it? And don't get all caught up in your own, inadequacies and your fears and take it to the adversary. You can't be coddled, either theologically and by not seeing any of this stuff, or you can't be coddled spiritually by not standing up to, to the adversary in ways that only you know. Joshua does it. Jesus does it over and over. He does it in his resurrected body when he visits those spirits in prison. He descended into Hades and below and preached to them. I'm up and there's nothing you can do about it. Alright, Joshua back here. At the time of Joshua, he cut off the Anakims, which we know were part of the Nephilim. And from all the mountains, Joshua destroyed them utterly in their cities. There were none of the Anakims left in the land of the children of Israel, only in Gaza and in Gath. And in Ashdod there remained. And this, of course, comes back to haunt Israel at the time of the kings, because who came from Gath? Yes, we know. Alright, here's some very important things. Joshua died not having finished the work. Judges come on the scene. And this is a quote, I just quoted a little bit here from Douglas Van Dorn's book and highlighted a few of the more important passages I thought you would enjoy. With Joshua gone, the conquest of other cities not taken earlier began. This is like a really quick run through Joshua and Judges. Judah took the lead, defeated many of the cities of the Canaanites and Perizzites, and the Lord was with Judah, but, quote, this is from the Word, he could not drive out the inhabitants of the plains. It said just before this that Joshua took care of the Anakims in the mountains, okay? The dudes in the plain gave them a tough time because they had, what? Chariots of iron. The strange verse, because in Joshua's day, the chariots did not seem to hinder them at all. Furthermore, Joshua's promise to another tribe was that they would not hinder them if they were faithful to God, meaning the chariots. Why did Judah not succeed? Good question. From here it only gets worse. It says that the people of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem. Manasseh did not drive out the people of Bethsham, Tanakh, Dor, Iblim, or Megiddo for any of their villages, for the Canaanites persisted in dwelling in the land. There was a reason. They put the Canaanites to forced labor, but they did not drive them out completely. They were supposed to. So Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites in Gezer. Zebulun left 2 cities full of Canaanites, but made them slaves. Asher did not drive out the Canaanites in 7 cities. Naphtali left the Canaanites in 2 cities and turned them into slaves. Is that what they were supposed to do? We saw that Saul was going to do that with Agag later, until a man of God came by and said, don't you remember what the word said? We were going to utterly blot out the Amalekites. So this is just not something, this is all written here for our good. And I say later, obey. Obey is better than to sacrifice. That's what Samuel said. Perhaps the worst of all, here's what Van Dorn finishes up this paragraph with. All the Amorites continued to live in the high country in Dan by Mount Hermon, but they were put into labor camps. It's a tough thing, this land of promise. So after the judges, we have the kings, and we're getting to the final dude here, Goliath of Gath. Saul was the first king. We saw that in Samuel 15. Did a kind of job he was doing. The incident with Agag the Amalekite, you saw that he did not obey. The story of Goliath, we see how not obeying, not killing them all, comes back to haunt them. Behold, to obey is better than to sacrifice, is what Samuel says in 1 Samuel 15 when Saul did not kill Agag, so Samuel hacked him up. Okay, just like you can't chop your mother up in Massachusetts. Who's that? Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her father 40 whacks. So Samuel did that to Agag. Then remember even how Joshua could not get rid of all the Anakim. So the Philistines, who had a great recruiting program in their school, they needed a very full back. They got their boy, Goliath of Gath, and they come around. I put a note in here. before we get into Goliath. One note, understanding the Nephilim, they disseminated into all the cultures of the ancient Near East, went their way down to Egypt. Can you say who built the pyramids? To the east, north, and south. And Van Dorn does a nice job of documenting a lot of the same things that the Egyptian pyramids had. And they show up in all cultures on the planet with their stories. And it's in graves, and it's in their art, and it's in your face. It's in God's face. They continually try to rub in God's face the bastardization of the human race. And this thought comes to mind here. Why were the children of Israel chosen? Because they needed pure genetic material for Jesus to be born. And so if you see what Abraham did, he sent his sons back to the land of their forefathers to get wives. The prophet says, you will not marry the wives of these tribes. You will not cohabitate with them. You will not do this. You will not. And they did it over and over and over again. And just imagine what God the Father wanted to do to protect his son coming, because he was coming. And what the Nephilim did all over the planet to try to stop it. So, kings of Israel, Goliath of Gath. And you know a lot of this. I'm not going to read the entire record because we have lots of pictures. That's so much better than the word, right? We have the pictures. There's Goliath of Gath. Well, let's read a little bit. Saul, this is Samuel 17, after Samuel 15, which is the record of Agag, the Amalekite. And Saul armed David with his armor. Okay, what went before this was, oh, I'm the big Philistine. I'm with the Philistines. Send me one of your minions out here, and we'll fight to the death. Goliath speaking here. One of you guys, come on out here. You know. he sets forth the challenge. And Saul armed David after David said a few things. Let's just read here. Saul armed David with his armor. He put the helmet of brass on his head, armed him with a coat of mail. David girded his sword upon his armor, and he wanted to go. He didn't want to go, essayed to go, for he had not proved it, the armor. So that doesn't mean David was just this little shepherd. He actually knew what armor was, but he hadn't proved it. So get that thought out of your mind. That's one thing reading between the lines here that you should read. Actually, he hadn't proved the armor, so he didn't want to use it. And David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. Took them off, took a staff in hand, 5 smooth stones out of the brook, put them in a shepherd's bag, which he had even in a script. Sling was in his hand, drew near the Philistine. And the Philistine came on, drew near to David. So they were going toward each other. It's important as we get into this. And the man who bore the shield went before him, Goliath. And when the Philistine looked about, saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy, fair countenance. The Philistine said to David, Am I a dog, that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Interesting. In invective, calling forth his gods. This is important. Who were his gods? We know his gods. They were God. There were gods. Don't think he wasn't real. And the Philistine said, Thou comest to me with staves. Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh to the fowls of the air, the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, You come to me with a sword and a spear and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of Jehovah Sebaoth, the Lord of hosts, Lord of the armies, the God of the armies of Israel. First, there's the Lord of the heavenly armies. That's what Lord of hosts means in this divine council theology we're in here. The Nephilim, sons of God coming down on Mount Hermon, other sons of God still in heaven with the Lord, God of hosts. I come to you in his name and the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. I will smite you. I will take your head from you. I will give the carcass of the host of the Philistines, give the carcasses of the host of Philistines this day to the fowls of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, and all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all the assembly shall know, all the church, all the assembly of Israel will know that the Lord saves not with sword or spear, for the battle is the Lord's. He's going to give He's going to give you into our hands. And it came to pass, when the Philistine rose, came and drew near David, that David hasted, ran toward him. You know, the story is, put his hand in the bag, threw the stone, and the guy fell. Okay? Oh, this is important. I'm going to highlight it. The stone sunk into his forehead. We'll get into that a little bit. And he, Goliath, fell upon his face to the earth. David prevailed over him with a sling, and with a stone smote the Philistine, slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, took his sword, drew it out of the sheath thereof. The guy hadn't even pulled his sword out. He was so disdainful of David. David had to pull it out, and he slew him and cut off his head. Sounds just like Samuel. Love it. Hacked up Agag the Amalekite. And when the Philistines saw this, what do you think they did? A couple things here I said I would talk to you a little bit about. All right, he was a Nephilim, and now he's a dead one. Okay? Stone sunk into his forehead. Some of you maybe have heard that the Hebrew word might be the word for forehead here might be the word knee. It doesn't really hold up under scrutiny. David hit him in the forehead and he fell forward. Now, most of the time, pictures, I thought I'd show you this. It is fictional. And I had this slide in my last show. Read your Bible as if it were fiction because it's fun. You know? Tell your kids about this stuff. Bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord of hosts. And here's the pictures that you always see. I love this one because it's a big head, the giant head. You know, it's a big old head. I really think that happened. I like the illustrator's look on David's face here, holding it up. And I love the blood. Let's not sugarcoat this. And there's a couple of more. But I wanted to show you a few things. Most of the time you see pictures with him on his back, right? Well, he didn't fall on his back, and David didn't cut his head off. He fell on his face. I thought it was very cool. I found this one. It was an anatomy version. I love the muscle definition. You got to have that in this day and time. And a couple of strange things, and this is why we have to have artists that depict exactly what's in Scripture. There's no greaves here on his knees. They show them here. Let me see if I can highlight that for you with my little circle tool. These are the greaves here on his knees. Whoops, there we go. Right here. Those were to protect his knees, and indeed this picture before showed it a little bit. This picture after doesn't on the left, because people don't read with precision. It shows Goliath carrying his own shield. So does this one. That's not true. He said it had his own shield bearer. Here's a better depiction. Here's the dude carrying Goliath's shield. I mean, if we're going to do this, let's get it right. Okay, but some do. And here it shows Goliath falling on his face. And I love this because it shows all the entrails coming out of his neck. I mean, see that? That's great. That's great stuff right there. Little Alana would paint it like this. So, we need it corrected in art. We need the story taught to our children. We need to show them that there's a battle. We need to show them that it's the Lord of hosts that goes before us. We need to tell people, look behind me and see the heavenly hosts that are behind me. And those people that have been praying lately, that have been antagonized by devils, spit in their face, go teach somebody the word. Spit in their face. Go witness. Just bring them the news of Jesus, who went down and taught the dudes that had caused the sin in the beginning that their days are numbered, and they will come to nothing upon the face of the earth, just like it says, I believe that's in Ezekiel, but it's also in 1 Corinthians 2, that those who did not know the secret of God are going to come to nothing. And it's these people that Jesus and you and I face daily. Don't you think that they're not powerful? So anyway, some very important things about the last Nephilim that I'm going to teach on tonight, because we're running out of time. But I did want to show you a very important depiction of what really happened during Goliath's time as we close here. This is a pictograph we found in Palestine of Goliath and their agents just before this battle, how it really went down. A rock, a lousy rock, look, make it a sling and a rock, we got a deal. And a sling and a rock did the deal. And Goliath of Gath is a dead Nephilim. So, Bob, where are you going with this? Well, we're going to go a little further here, and I want to show you things. Some final notes on the Nephilim. This is the last slide, actually. I wanted to read something even in the book of Esther. The book of Esther, that lovely book that everybody, they say the Dead Sea Scrolls doesn't even has most of the books of the Hebrew Scriptures, but not Esther. But here's the book of Esther that says, let me just read this. Then Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends said unto him, Let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high. And tomorrow speak thou unto the king that Mordecai be hanged thereon. Then go on thou in merrily with the king into the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. 100-foot or 75-foot gallows? How big do you think? How big do you think that this dude was? I thought you'd want to see that. Little that we can learn from these records, that Holy Writ informs us in later incidents, as we saw Jude, Peter, and Peter, that the angels that sin are now in chains of darkness. We saw that the cultural message of a very real bunch of angels that sinned is disseminated into the mythology of other cultures, but it's really a myth that is true. It really happened. In Amos we knew that the Amorites were giants, so don't stop reading carefully the book of Amos. Or maybe even the book of Hezekiah. There's gems in there. All right, some study subjects. Just thoughts that crossed my mind as I closed this teaching out. And, the subject of the Nephilim, I don't suppose I'll teach a whole bunch on it, so except to indicate to those people that it's a real thing and that it's laced throughout the Scriptures. But just as Palestine was populated by them before the arrival of Israel, what about before the time of Jesus' arrival? It says in Revelation 12:3 that it was during the time just before Jesus' birth that the dragon threw 1/3 of the stars of heaven down to earth. Not in the beginning of time, just before Jesus' birth. That's pretty important, folks, because I'm going to teach next month on Lucifer. I'm not going to give up. It's going to be a weird angel verse in November. We're going to go back to one of those. We'll get into Lucifer. And he hasn't fallen yet. There's a reason. Another study subject, the Rephaim. Who are these enigmatic folks? And we're working on some of these in our research group. Not feverishly, because we want to work on some stuff that really helps defeat these things. How did the devils arrive in the Gospels? I sort of gave you a hint already that it was just before Jesus' birth that a lot of these guys arrived on the scene. Some of the statements like those devils that Jesus cast out and that complained that they did not want to be done away with before their time, before the time. So these devils actually know, just like the larger spiritual entities that are governing geographic areas, they know that they're toast, that they are going to come to nothing on the earth. They know it. It's all through Scripture. I've got a chapter in the book. It's, those who are coming to nothing. I've got 10 scriptures that say it. So, all the things that we can study. Judaic commentaries like Enoch. Okay, it's not like you're going to go into Enoch and read it like Scripture, but Jesus and his contemporaries, they knew the book of Enoch because they quoted it. These people that say you can't read. Look, we read commentaries today. It's because there's so much been dug up in the Middle East since the late 1800s when we went back there, okay? When we actually had political reason to go into Egypt, and the sarcophagi of the pharaohs were dug up. Well, the same thing happened in Palestine in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They started digging up these massive mounds called tells, which housed ancient civilizations, and they started unearthing these tablets, which were not biblical, but they had stories that sounded like the biblical story, like the Enuma Elish story in Babylon, and then better stories out of Ugarit in Syria. This is what I studied at the University of Chicago Oriental Institute. And we know a lot more today, and we can show that these things that occurred in the biblical record are actually true, that these places existed, that these men existed, and that, we can be informed of things. Well, the book of Enoch's got a lot of stuff in it about the Nephilim and about the spirits that sinned. Not necessarily all true, but a good portion of it. You can lace it together just like we were, looking at the Mount Hermon. And with that, last thing here, what does the Apocalypse of John tell us about the future? And, quote, "And as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the Son of Man," from Luke 17, and it's in Matthew 2:24. What's that have to say about, why was the flood of Noah? It was to wipe out these people whose every thought of their heart was always evil continually. These guys that had corrupted the true genetic purity of God's men and women born. And, we have discussions about what it's going to be like in the end times. And I'm not going to go into speculation here, but it's not, genetics are genetics. And there's just a lot of stuff that you can spin off from here. I'm not sure if it's all profitable, but the fact is, the Word is not, you're not uninformed when the Word speaks about things like the Nephilim. It's not just something you put in your, it's not something you don't talk about it Sunday. This is stuff that really gets people excited. And then you can teach them all about Jesus and get them born again. But you know what? This is in the Word too. And it's exciting stuff because God is teaching us, why Jesus went to the Mount Hermon. Why, a lot of the things that occurred in his life were in the face of what the adversary had set up as he arrived, and why I believe the Word fits like a hand in a glove, and why you can talk about Draco the dragon and Virgo the virgin in the book of Revelation and tie in the constellations, because God had it written there first. It's exciting stuff. So with that, I'm going to close this last session of the Nephilim. We'll maybe get back to it some other time and tell you to look forward to next month, November 2015, where I'll teach about Isaiah 13 and 14. You want to read ahead? Try to put some of that stuff together for yourself. I've got a lot to say about Lucifer and why he is who he is and where he's going and why we should be concerned about him in another Weird Angel verse.